The air in Raven's End had a crystalline chill, a foretaste of the harsh New England winter that always arrived too early. The town was a quiet, stubborn collection of colonial-era homes nestled amongst dense ancient pines, the kind of place where history didn't just linger, it suffocated. Delilah Vance stepped off the Greyhound bus, pulling her worn suitcase across the asphalt. She was 22, dressed in a faded denim jacket and carrying the tired optimism of someone fleeing a past they couldn't outrun. Her only possessions were the clothes on her back, the few dollars tucked into her shoe, and the singular handwritten address, the Blackwood Estate. Raven's End was not her choice. It was a refuge, a place far enough from the anonymous city where she'd made the mistakes that still haunted her sleep, mistakes involving trust and a debt that needed years to pay off. The job as a live-in housemaid at the Blackwood Estate had come through a cryptic classified ad in a distant newspaper, offering good pay and absolute discretion. She was hoping for a quiet anonymity, a place to disappear until she could re-emerge as a new, less burdened person. The Blackwood Estate sat a mile outside of town, a hulking, imposing structure of dark stone built in the mid-1700s. It wasn't beautiful, it was intimidating, a sentinel of a bygone era. A high, rusting iron gate marked the entrance to a driveway flanked by towering, skeletal oak trees. When she arrived, an older man, Silas, the estate's taciturn groundskeeper, was waiting. He had a face etched with hard labor, and a suspicion that seemed to predate Delilah's arrival by decades. "You're late," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound. He didn't offer to help with her suitcase. "The bus had a delay in Manchester," Delilah apologized, feeling the weight of the enormous house pressing down on her. "The rules are simple, girl. Respect the house, respect the routine, and stay out of Mr. Blackwood's way." Silas led her through a side door into the kitchen. It was vast, with high ceilings and rows of gleaming copper pots, yet it felt sterile, unused. The main employer, Mr. Alistair Blackwood, a reclusive widower rumored to be obsessed with collecting rare historical artifacts, remained unseen. Her immediate supervisor was Mrs. Helen Albright, a severe, impeccably dressed woman in her late 50s who managed the household with the chilling efficiency of a drill sergeant. "Miss Vance," Mrs. Albright began, her tone devoid of warmth, "your duties are rigorous. The master's schedule is inviolable. You will wake at 5, polish silver until 6, prepare breakfast, and then clean the west wing. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to engage Mr. Blackwood in conversation. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Delilah replied, her resolve hardening. This was a job, not a home. She could endure a cold atmosphere if it bought her time and peace. Mrs. Albright spent the next hour outlining the geography of the sprawling house. The grand, dust-sheeted ballroom, the vast library with its forbidden books, the master's sealed study. When they reached the pantry, a small, unmarked wooden door near the back caught Delilah's attention. It was darker, older, and slightly warped. "And what's through here?" Delilah asked, pointing. Mrs. Albright stiffened perceptibly. "That is the root cellar. It is used for storing preserves and certain aged wines. You will have no reason to go down there. Ever. Silas is responsible for retrieving anything from that room. It is locked nightly, and the key is kept with me." The prohibition, combined with Mrs. Albright's sudden rigidity, did what all prohibitions do. It sparked a flicker of curiosity in Delilah. It wasn't the supernatural lure of a forbidden space. It was the human, tangible mystery of why a simple storage room would be placed so firmly off-limits in a house already full of sealed secrets. What did they not want her to see? The first week was an exercise in unrelenting labor and isolation. The house was enormous, and the cleaning tasks seemed infinite. Delilah quickly established a rhythm. The early mornings in the sterile silence, the tedious work in rooms where no one ever seemed to sit. The solitary meals in the servants' dining area. She noticed the details. The heavy leaded glass windows that didn't let in enough light. The faint recurring scent in the hallways. Not mildew, but something sharper, like old leather and damp earth. And the almost total silence. The only sounds were the distant measured ticking of the grandfather clock and the rustle of Silas in the gardens. Mr. Blackwood was a ghost, a presence felt only through the immaculate order of the rooms she cleaned and the daily instructions passed down by Mrs. Albright. Her only ally, or rather the closest thing to it, was Phoebe, the aging cook, a woman whose exhaustion was visible in the slump of her shoulders. Phoebe rarely spoke, but her eyes held a constant, weary pity when she looked at Delilah. One evening, after a particularly long day scrubbing the entryway's marble floor, Delilah found Phoebe staring out the kitchen window into the moonless night. "Phoebe," Delilah whispered, "is there something wrong with the root cellar?" Mrs. Albright seemed so strict about it. Phoebe's eyes flicked to the small wooden door, then back to Delilah, her expression suddenly fearful. She didn't speak, but instead, she reached out and squeezed Delilah's wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Some places in this house," Phoebe finally mumbled, her voice barely audible, "don't just store things, Delilah. They hold things. The cellar. It's colder than it should be. The earth is close down there." The warning was vague, unsettling, and perfectly human. It spoke of secrets, maybe past events, or simply the psychological burden of being confined in a place that felt perpetually watched. The following Monday, the small, seemingly insignificant detail that would shatter Delilah's tenuous peace finally appeared. While wiping down the counter near the pantry, she saw it. The heavy iron key to the root cellar, usually secured on a hook near Mrs. Albright's bedroom, was hanging precariously from a thin string loop attached to a peg in the pantry wall. Mrs. Albright must have used it to retrieve something and, in her haste, hung it in the wrong spot, intending to move it later. A sense of urgent, almost physical pull seized Delilah. It wasn't a reckless impulse. It was a need to know if the fear surrounding the room was justified or if it was merely a psychological tactic to control the staff. She glanced at the clock. Mrs. Albright was conducting her midday inspection in the distant north wing. Phoebe was out in the small herb garden. This was her window. Delilah took a deep, steadying breath. This was her chance to confront the first real mystery of Raven's End. A mystery she knew she couldn't leave unsolved if she was ever to feel truly safe in this house. She reached for the heavy key. The iron was cold, solid, and strangely comforting in her palm. She inserted the key into the lock on the dark, warped wooden door. The mechanism turned with a soft metallic click, and the smell that wafted out was the same sharp scent she'd noticed in the hallways. Cold, rich, damp earth, and something vaguely metallic, like blood mixed with iron. Delilah paused, her hand hovering over the rough wood of the door. The sound of her own heartbeat was deafening. "It's just a cellar, just vegetables and wine," she told herself. But the metallic scent was potent, and the silence of the house seemed to deepen, amplifying the sense that she was committing an irreversible act. She pulled the door open just enough to slip through, the hinges groaning in protest like a deep, suffering breath. A steep, dark staircase dropped into the blackness. The cold air rushed up to meet her, a profound, biting cold that felt unnatural for a late October day. Delilah Vance, the housemaid who came seeking refuge, stepped alone onto the first wooden stair, descending into the cellar of the Blackwood estate, and was never seen again. If the chilling silence of Raven's End has already got its hooks in you, make sure you don't miss a single step of Delilah's journey. Subscribe to the channel now and hit the notification bell so you're ready for Chapter 2. The morning sun, struggling to penetrate the thick New Hampshire fog, revealed only the unnerving absence of Delilah Vance. When Mrs. Albright came down at 5 a.m., the silver was not polished, the stove was cold, and the small iron key to the root cellar was gone from the pantry wall. Mrs. Albright's initial reaction was not panic, but a controlled, terrifying fury. She didn't shout. She simply stood in the middle of the kitchen, her hands clasped tightly, the silence more condemning than any outburst. "Phoebe!" she barked, her voice slicing through the air. Phoebe, already hunched over the stove, jumped. "Yes, Mrs. Albright." "Where is Miss Vance?" Phoebe wrung her hands. I haven't seen her since last night, ma'am. After supper, she seemed tired." Mrs. Albright's eyes, cold and sharp, swept the room, resting momentarily on the heavy root cellar door, which appeared completely shut and locked. The only evidence of the night before was the absence of the key and the housemaid. By 6:30 a.m. Mr. Blackwood was informed. Alistair Blackwood finally emerged from his seclusion, a man in his early 60s, gaunt and impeccably dressed, with eyes that held the glazed-over look of deep, prolonged preoccupation. His presence was not intimidatingly grand, but unnervingly quiet. A man who seemed more interested in the dust particles in the air than in the people around him. "She's gone," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice soft, almost conversational. "Yes, sir. And the key to the root cellar is missing," Mrs. Albright reported, her professionalism faltering slightly under the weight of the circumstance. Mr. Blackwood merely nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "A flight risk, perhaps." She had that look about her, a desperate girl. He dismissed the incident with startling speed. "Have Silas check the grounds. If she fled, she must have walked. But do not alert the local authorities. The house's reputation must remain intact." The lack of concern was the first layer of the new, escalating mystery. Delilah hadn't fled. She had gone down. Silas, the groundskeeper, was called in. He confirmed he had locked the main gate last night. If Delilah was gone, she was still on the estate property. He was immediately dispatched to search the grounds, including the large, overgrown woods bordering the estate. Mrs. Albright then turned her attention to Phoebe, the cook. Did Delilah mention anything? Anyone she was meeting? Any plans? Phoebe shook her head vehemently, the movement causing her apron to rustle. "No, ma'am. She was quiet. Kept to herself. But she did ask about the cellar." Mrs. Albright's spine went rigid. "What did you tell her?" "Just that it was cold. That it holds things," Phoebe whispered, her eyes widening with genuine fear. "I didn't encourage her, ma'am, I swear, but she looked curious." This confirmed Mrs. Albright's rising suspicion. Delilah hadn't run off. She had been consumed by the house's forbidden secret. The root cellar door remained locked, forcing a tense standoff. Mr. Blackwood, after his brief appearance, retreated once more to his study, leaving the management of the situation entirely to Mrs. Albright. "Silas, the spare key," Mrs. Albright ordered, her voice low and strained. The search of the grounds yielded nothing. No footprints leading away from the house, no dropped suitcase, no sign of Delilah. Silas returned, his face grim. "The woods are thick, Mrs. Albright, but I covered the perimeter. She didn't leave." Mrs. Albright, holding the heavy spare key to the cellar, felt a profound, cold dread settle over her. She had been protecting this house, this man, and this secret for 20 years. Now, a simple, desperate girl had walked straight into it. "Phoebe, stay in the kitchen. Silas, come with me." The metallic scent was stronger now when they stood by the door. Silas inserted the spare key, and the lock turned smoothly. This time the silence that followed the click was absolute. Mrs. Albright pushed the door open. The air that rose from the darkness below was not just cold, it was dead. Silas pulled a powerful, oil-burning lantern from the shelf, lit it, and descended first. Mrs. Albright followed, stepping carefully down the wooden stairs that were slick with ancient moisture. The root cellar was small, circular, and lined with rough-hewn stone shelves packed with jars of pickled vegetables and bottles of aged Bordeaux. It was exactly what it purported to be, a storage room. Silas slowly swept the lantern's beam across the room. Nothing was disturbed. The jars were in place. The wine racks were full. There was no sign of a struggle, no dropped item, and certainly no sign of Delilah. But in the center of the damp, packed dirt floor, Silas stopped. The beam of light focused on a single, unnerving detail. A small patch of dirt had been recently disturbed. It was a circular, shallow depression, as if something heavy had briefly rested there and been removed. Silas slowly knelt, his calloused fingers brushing the cold, loose earth. Someone was down here, he confirmed, his voice barely a whisper, and they took something out. "Search, Silas! Search everything!" Mrs. Albright commanded, her breath misting in the frigid air. Silas moved slowly, methodically. He checked the empty spaces between the wine bottles, the corners, the shadowy niches. The disturbed dirt remained the only anomaly. Then, from behind a stack of burlap sacks near the back wall, Silas pulled out the missing iron key. It was coated in a thin layer of damp earth. Mrs. Albright snatched the key, her mind racing. Delilah had opened the door, gone down, and then locked herself in. But why? And where had she gone inside this confined space? The disturbed dirt meant something was moved. But what? As they ascended, locking the cellar door tightly behind them, Silas looked at Mrs. Albright, his eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light and a deep, ingrained fear. "Mrs. Albright," he said, his voice shaking, "whatever she was looking for, or whatever found her, it's not in the cellar anymore. But she certainly didn't leave through the front door." The house returned to its silent, watchful state. The missing key now locked away, the root cellar sealed. But the house's routine was forever altered. Delilah Vance had vanished, leaving behind only an iron key and a small, ominous patch of disturbed earth, signaling that the Blackwood estate's dark history was not dormant, but merely waiting for the right moment to claim its next occupant. The disappearance of Delilah had a profound, if unspoken, effect on the remaining staff. The silence of the house became aggressive, the shadows darker. Phoebe was visibly distraught, her movements slow and hesitant. Silas was grim, his eyes constantly scanning the grounds, his suspicion now directed inward, toward the house itself. Mrs. Albright, however, maintained an outward facade of steely control, meticulously detailing Delilah's absence in the daily logbook, a necessary formality for a police inquiry that had been strictly forbidden by Mr. Blackwood. The girl absconded. She was clearly unstable, he had stated, settling the matter with chilling finality. But Delilah hadn't absconded. She had vanished inside the house. 2 days after Delilah's disappearance, while cleaning the hallway outside Mr. Blackwood's sealed study, Phoebe made a discovery. Under the edge of a thick Persian rug, her hand brushed against something small and metallic. It was a silver locket, broken at the clasp. Phoebe's heart hammered against her ribs. She recognized it instantly. Delilah had worn it every day, tucked inside her uniform, a small private talisman. Phoebe, terrified of Mrs. Albright's reaction but unable to keep the discovery secret, approached Silas in the garden. He was meticulously raking the perfectly manicured lawn, the absurdity of the task stark against the ongoing mystery. "Silas," she whispered, pulling him behind a tall hedge. "Look, I found it outside the master's study." Silas took the locket. It was tarnished, cheap silver, but the significance of the location was paramount. Mr. Blackwood's study was the one area of the house staff were expressly forbidden to approach, a sanctuary sealed by heavy mahogany and a deep historical silence. He opened the locket. Inside were 2 faded small photographs, a young Delilah and an older woman with kind, weary eyes, presumably her mother. The locket itself offered no clue, but its presence outside the study completely contradicted the narrative of a runaway housemaid. "She didn't leave the house," Silas muttered, his gaze fixed on the study door. "She was here, outside his room, and she fought or she ran. "We have to tell Mrs. Albright," Phoebe insisted, her voice trembling. "No." Silas cut her off, his eyes narrowed with dawning realization. "Mrs. Albright already knows more than she lets on. She's protecting him. We go to the police, Mr. Blackwood gets angry, and we lose our jobs and the girl is still gone. We need proof." Silas decided on a perilous course of action, a covert investigation of the study. The opportunity came that evening. Mr. Blackwood, suffering from one of his recurring acute headaches, had been called away to Boston for an emergency consultation with his specialist, leaving the house unnervingly empty. Mrs. Albright, exhausted but watchful, retired early. At midnight, Silas and Phoebe crept toward the study. The lock on the mahogany door was old and complex, but Silas, a former carpenter with a lifetime of experience maintaining the estate, worked patiently with a set of fine picks. After 20 minutes of agonizing silence, the tumblers finally turned. The door swung inward with a heavy, protesting groan. The study was dark and filled with the stale air of neglect. Dust motes danced in the single beam of Silas's torch. It wasn't a room for reading, it was a museum of obsession. Rare maps, centuries-old ledgers, and bizarre, unnerving artifacts, small stone carvings, rusted metal tools of uncertain purpose, were displayed behind glass. But Silas and Phoebe weren't interested in the collection. They were focused on the floor. Near a large, claw-footed desk, the light caught on a faint, almost invisible mark. It was a slight discoloration on the hardwood floor, a faint, reddish-brown smudge, carefully wiped but not entirely removed. "Blood," Phoebe whispered, covering her mouth. "No," Silas corrected, kneeling closer. "It's too thin, too oily. It's rust, or maybe old polish." They searched the desk. It was locked. Silas worked quickly, and soon the desk drawers were open, revealing a meticulously organized interior. Business papers, deeds to the property dating back to the 1700s, and a personal journal. Phoebe grabbed the journal, a large, leather-bound volume. This might tell us something. But Silas was focused on a separate, hidden compartment at the back of the bottom drawer. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not jewelry or cash, but a collection of old newspaper clippings. The clippings were all from local New Hampshire papers spanning the last 50 years, and they all detailed local disappearances. Young women, often housemaids or transient workers, who had vanished without a trace from the surrounding area. There were 5 clippings in total, each a chilling echo of Delilah's fate. The date of the most recent clipping was only 5 years ago. "My God, Silas," Phoebe breathed, her face pale. "He collects them. He knows what happened to them." Silas looked down at the pile of lost girls, then at the sealed room. The Blackwood estate was not just holding a secret. It was a system of repetition. "We need to know what Delilah saw," Silas stated, pulling the heavy journal from Phoebe's hands. He flipped through the pages. The handwriting was elegant but erratic. The entries weren't daily recollections. They were philosophical musings on ownership, possession, and the permanence of legacy. An entry dated just 3 days before Delilah's arrival chilled them to the bone. "The old system falters. The replacement must be flawless. I must not lose control of the supply chain. Everything returns to the earth in its time, and the earth requires its due." "Supply chain," Phoebe repeated, her eyes wide with terror. "What is he buying or selling?" "Not buying or selling," Silas corrected, his voice flat with horror. "He's managing something that disappears people." Just as Silas was about to replace the journal, the heavy sound of a car crunching gravel echoed up the driveway. Mr. Blackwood was back. Panic seized them. They had minutes, maybe seconds. Silas quickly secured the desk, jammed the journal back in place, and slammed the study door shut, replacing the lock just as the front door of the main house creaked open downstairs. They scrambled back to the servants' quarters, their hearts pounding in unison, leaving the broken locket and the oil stain of the forbidden secret behind them. The house had swallowed Delilah, and now it was closing its jaw on the only two people trying to find her. The immediate return of Mr. Blackwood forced Silas and Phoebe to retreat into their established routines, pretending the midnight excursion never happened. The weight of the newspaper clippings and the unsettling journal entry pressed down on them, transforming the fear of a missing girl into the realization of a systematic pattern. They were working for a predator. Mr. Blackwood's behavior was unchanged, detached, silent, preoccupied. But now, every time he crossed the hallway, Silas felt a cold, calculating gaze lingering on him. The suspense wasn't in waiting for the killer. It was in the excruciating act of serving him. Phoebe, fueled by a mixture of terror and fierce loyalty to Delilah, began her own covert investigation in the kitchen. She remembered Delilah talking about the house's strange geography, particularly the inconsistencies in the blueprints that Mrs. Albright had pointed out. Phoebe decided to look for a historical map of the property. She knew the house's layout almost perfectly, but in the large, dusty attic, she found a storage chest containing ancient, rolled-up plans. After an hour of agonizing, dust-choked searching, she found it. A brittle, hand-drawn map of the estate, dated 1853. Phoebe spread the map out on a spare bed. The floor plan of the main house was largely the same, but one detail was starkly different from the blueprints Mrs. Albright had shown Delilah: the root cellar. On the modern blueprints, the cellar was a solid circular room with only one entrance. On the 1853 map, the room was denoted, but next to it, under a section labeled Old Foundations, was a faint dashed line marked Service Access Shaft. The shaft was shown leading from the root cellar, not out into the garden but inward, running under the main structure and stopping directly beneath the location of Mr. Blackwood's study. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity: the disturbed dirt in the cellar, the broken locket outside the study, the oily stain, and the journal entry mentioning the supply chain. Delilah hadn't vanished in the cellar, she had been moved through it. The root cellar was not a storage room, it was a discreet internal transfer point. Phoebe rushed to Silas, who was repairing a loose slate on the roof, the vast, forbidding grounds spread out below him. "Silas, the map. Look." Silas wiped his gloved hands and studied the brittle paper. The dotted line connecting the cellar to the study's foundation was undeniable. "A maintenance shaft," Silas confirmed, his face grim. "They used to build them for coal delivery or internal plumbing access in the older houses. This one's been sealed off and forgotten, except by Blackwood. He brings things or people into that study through the cellar," Phoebe whispered, clutching the locket. "But why? And how did Delilah get the door open if the key was with Mrs. Albright?" Silas looked again at the location of the broken locket near the study. She must have found the key in the pantry, went down and saw something. Whatever Blackwood keeps or does in that study, it connects to the cellar. He found her, and he took her into his study. The question then shifted from where Delilah was to what Mr. Blackwood was doing with the women. The newspaper clippings suggested a serial pattern, but without any supernatural motive. What was the practical human reason for the disappearances? Silas, remembering the artifacts in the study, made a terrifying deduction. "He's a collector, Phoebe, but not just of rare maps and ancient stones. He collects trophies. He manages the supply chain." They had to find the entry point of the shaft in the cellar, but the cellar was locked, and Mrs. Albright was now hypervigilant, keeping the spare key tied around her neck. They needed a distraction. The opportunity came the next afternoon. An early-season blizzard swept in, blanketing Raven's End in heavy snow and knocking out the power to the Blackwood estate. The generator struggled to keep up, plunging large sections of the house into thick, total darkness. Mrs. Albright was immediately occupied with managing the failing generator, and Mr. Blackwood, who was sensitive to the disruption. Silas grabbed a crowbar and an industrial flashlight. "I need 30 minutes, Phoebe. Keep Albright away from the pantry." Phoebe, her face pale but determined, nodded. "Go. I'll tell her the pipes are bursting in the west wing." Silas descended into the cellar, the darkness total except for the narrow, straining beam of his flashlight. The smell of earth and metal was overwhelming. He found the patch of disturbed dirt and followed the line on the map. It led him to the back wall, behind the wine racks. He began moving the racks, straining against the heavy wood and hundreds of bottles. The noise was immense, masked only by the howling wind and the sporadic coughing of the straining generator. Behind the final rack, the light beam revealed a section of the stone wall that was slightly different, a line of mortar that appeared newer, less organically aged. Silas ran his gloved hand over it. It was cold, damp, and gave slightly under pressure. He placed the tip of the crowbar into a small crack and leveraged his weight. With a grinding, scraping sound, the mortar began to crumble, and a section of the stone wall, a heavy stone panel, began to pivot inward. The opening revealed a claustrophobic, pitch-black shaft, exactly as drawn on the map. The air that rushed out was stale, frigid, and carried the stronger, unmistakable scent of decomposition and wet cloth. Silas peered in. The shaft was just wide enough for a person to crawl through. At the bottom, he saw a dark, heavy object. He shone the light down. It was a small canvas duffel bag, the kind a transient worker might carry, and next to it, partially covered by dust and debris, was a flash of color, a small, bright red bandana. Silas recognized the bandana instantly. Delilah had worn it tied around her hair on her first day. It was undeniable proof. She had been down here, and this was where her initial journey had ended. But where was she now? As Silas reached to retrieve the bandana, the generator outside suddenly died with a final guttural choke. The flashlight beam, weakened by the failing batteries, began to flicker violently, plunging the shaft into momentary blackness. And from the darkness of the shaft, a sound emerged. Not a cry, but the distinct dry scrape of gravel being moved, suggesting something large was being dragged along the floor of the passage, coming toward him. Silas froze, his breath catching in the icy air. The sound of scraping gravel in the dark shaft galvanized Silas into action. The knowledge that he was not alone in this dark space, and that the source of the noise was approaching, shattered his fear. He wasn't dealing with ghosts or whispers, but with a physical, human presence. He swiftly pulled his arm back, narrowly avoiding whatever was being dragged through the narrow tunnel. The flickering beam of his flashlight caught a glimpse of a dark, heavy object being slowly hauled past the opening, moving from the cellar toward the main house foundation. Silas didn't hesitate. He slammed the heavy stone panel shut, the grinding of stone against stone echoing loudly in the enclosed space. He quickly began forcing the displaced wine rack back into place, securing the temporary wall. He was breathing heavily, his hands shaking, but the instinct for survival and the need to escape the cellar before the power outage was resolved was paramount. He was halfway up the stairs when the cellar door above him was violently thrown open. The rush of cold air and the sudden weak light from a nearby hallway lamp illuminated the rigid, terrifying figure of Mrs. Albright. "Silas, what are you doing down here?" she demanded, her voice a low, fierce hiss of anger. "The generator is down. You were supposed to be securing the windows." Silas stood on the damp steps, the crowbar still clutched in his hand, the evidence of his transgression undeniable. "The cellar door was open, Mrs. Albright. I heard a noise. A rat, maybe. I was checking to secure it." "The key is around my neck, Silas. The door was locked when I came down to check on the pantry." Mrs. Albright's eyes, cold and assessing, swept past him to the shelves. Silas's heart sank. She noticed the small, but noticeable displacement of the wine racks. She knew he was lying. "You are dismissed, Silas," she stated, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Gather your things. You leave the grounds by morning." The threat of dismissal was a clear warning. Blackwood was untouchable. Silas knew he had failed to find Delilah, but he now knew the method. He had to trust Phoebe to find a way to communicate this to the outside world. As he turned to leave, Mrs. Albright grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "You know something, Silas. Something you shouldn't. Did that girl put you up to this?" "I know the house, Mrs. Albright," Silas said, looking her directly in the eye. "I know its history, and I know there have been other girls." The effect of his words was immediate and shattering. Mrs. Albright's severe composure crumbled, replaced by a momentary terrifying flash of genuine human pain and fear. Don't talk about that," she choked out, her face pale. "I won't tell anyone, Mrs. Albright, if you tell me where Delilah is. We can still save her. We can still stop him." But the vulnerability vanished as quickly as it appeared. Mrs. Albright hardened her expression, her fear transforming back into defensive ferocity. "Get out, Silas, before the master finds out what you've been doing. You can't stop him. No one can." Silas didn't press. He had what he needed, confirmation of his darkest fears. The disappearances were known to Mrs. Albright, and she was an unwilling accomplice, terrified by Mr. Blackwood's systematic cruelty. He returned to the kitchen. Phoebe was there, her face a mask of worry, nervously wiping down a clean countertop. "He knows," Silas whispered, gathering his old work coat. "I'm fired. I have to go." "Silas, no. What did you find?" Phoebe demanded, grabbing his arm. He quickly scribbled 2 words on a small piece of parchment, using a pencil stub. "Shaft. Study." He folded it and pressed it into her hand, along with the broken silver locket. "He's moving things, or people, from the cellar, under the floor, and into his study. He's doing it for a purpose, Phoebe, not just for sport. He's a collector. The women are the artifacts." "What do I do?" Phoebe looked terrified, the weight of the secret crushing her. "Wait until I'm gone. Then, when he least expects it, call the state police. Tell them you're trapped and that a body is buried under the Blackwood study. Use the locket as proof. And whatever you do, Phoebe, don't let him see you're scared." Before he could say another word, the kitchen door swung open. Mr. Blackwood stood there, his figure silhouetted by the dim light of the hallway. He looked impossibly calm, a man who had not just returned from a stressful trip, but who had just finished a deeply satisfying task. "Silas," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice quiet, almost purring. "Mrs. Albright informs me you've been neglecting your duties and showing an unhealthy curiosity about the structural integrity of my home." Silas stood tall, facing his former employer. "I know what you're doing, Mr. Blackwood." Mr. Blackwood merely smiled, a slow, chilling pull of the lips that didn't reach his cold, vacant eyes. "You think you do, Silas, but you misunderstand my passion. It's not about death. It's about preservation." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I won't have you muddying my affairs, Silas. You will leave now, immediately. And if you speak a single word about the house or Miss Vance, I will make sure the life you have waiting for you is far worse than the one you left behind. I am a collector, Silas, and I have a long reach." The threat was clear, not just of physical harm, but of a deep psychological devastation that spoke to Blackwood's knowledge of Silas's past. Silas knew he was powerless without proof. He clutched his coat, nodded once, and walked out the door, into the blizzard and the terrifying solitude of the outside world, leaving Phoebe alone in the house with the collector and the secret tunnel leading to the study. The silence in the Blackwood estate after Silas's departure was not a relief. It was an expansion of the terror. Phoebe was now truly alone, trapped within the confines of the house with a murderer, and his willing yet clearly terrified accomplice, Mrs. Albright. The cold efficiency of the house continued, but the routine was a fragile mask over the escalating fear. Mr. Blackwood was now fully engaged in the house, no longer hiding in his study. He moved through the rooms with a disturbing calm, observing Phoebe, sometimes offering a soft, unsettling pleasantry that made her skin crawl. He was watching, waiting to see if Silas had spoken, or if Phoebe would dare to act. Phoebe kept the note and the locket hidden in the lining of her Bible, a small comfort in the suffocating darkness. She knew she had to call the police, but the telephone in the kitchen was next to Mrs. Albright's daily workstation, and the main line in the parlor was only used by Mr. Blackwood. She needed absolute solitude, a moment that the house seemed intent on denying her. Days stretched into a single, terrifying blur. The weather remained foul, the snow blocking the narrow road to Raven's End, further isolating the estate. The forced proximity of her employer and supervisor was a constant psychological pressure cooker. Finally, a window opened. Mr. Blackwood announced he would be spending the afternoon supervising Silas's replacement, a local handyman, clearing a particularly treacherous ice buildup near the main gate. Mrs. Albright, exhausted from the stress, retired to her room with one of her severe migraines. The house was empty. The kitchen phone was ringing with opportunity. Phoebe's hands shook so violently she almost dropped the receiver. She took a deep, fortifying breath, remembering Delilah's face and Silas's final instructions. She dialed the state police non-emergency line. The voice on the other end was professional, calm, and maddeningly slow. "State Police, how may I direct your call?" "I need to report a missing person," Phoebe whispered, her voice tight with panic. "And a crime. At the Blackwood estate in Raven's End." "I see, ma'am. Can you spell the last name for me?" Phoebe fought against the need to scream. "Blackwood. A housemaid, Delilah Vance, vanished a week ago. She didn't run. She was killed." "I have proof." "And what is your name, ma'am?" "Phoebe. I'm the cook. Listen to me. The key is the root cellar. There's a secret shaft leading from the cellar to the foundation of Mr. Blackwood's study. I have reason to believe there's a body, perhaps more than one, buried there. We found her locket, near the study." The operator paused, a silence that felt heavy with skepticism. "Ma'am, the Blackwood estate is a very old and prominent property. Are you certain about these claims? A secret shaft and buried bodies?" "Yes, he's a collector. He's dangerous. Please, you have to come now before he comes back." Phoebe's terror was rising, making her voice break. She heard the distant grinding sound of a snowplow, or possibly Blackwood's returning vehicle, approaching the estate. "Ma'am, we will file the report immediately and send a patrol car for a welfare check. Please try to remain calm and safe. Can you describe Mr. Blackwood's physical appearance?" Phoebe was giving the description when she heard the unmistakable sound of a door clicking shut on the second floor. Mrs. Albright was moving. "I have to go. He's coming back. The proof is the locket. Please send someone to the root cellar." Phoebe hung up the phone abruptly, her heart pounding. She had done it. Help was coming. She walked back to her station, feigning a calm she didn't possess. 10 minutes later, a set of heavy, measured footsteps approached the kitchen. It was not Mrs. Albright, but Mr. Blackwood. He stopped directly behind her. Phoebe froze, her back to him. "The ice was quite the challenge, Phoebe," he said smoothly. "The handyman handled it well, but he insisted on using the telephone in the groundskeeper's shed. Apparently the one in the kitchen was busy for quite some time." Phoebe felt the blood drain from her face. I was calling the butcher, sir, to confirm the order. The storm delayed the shipment." "The butcher," Mr. Blackwood repeated, his tone conversational. He walked around the counter, his gaze dissecting her. "That's odd, Phoebe. I was just speaking with the butcher's service myself. They confirmed they only received one call today, and it was a peculiar one. A woman claiming to be Phoebe, sounding highly distressed, asking about the fate of the order, and making strange, rambling comments about a missing silver locket. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. "You didn't call the butcher, Phoebe. You called the police." Phoebe said nothing. She couldn't move. She couldn't look away from his terrible, knowing eyes. "And you told them about Delilah, and the cellar, and the study." Mr. Blackwood's smile was a terrifying study in controlled malice. "You have compromised my preservation project, Phoebe. That is a mistake I cannot forgive." He reached out a slow, deliberate hand and gently touched the small bump in her apron pocket where she had momentarily transferred the folded note and the locket. He didn't need to reach further. He knew. Phoebe was trapped. Her one shot at salvation turned into a terrifying confirmation of her fate. The patrol car was coming, but now Blackwood was ready. Mr. Blackwood did not lash out violently. His response was a masterpiece of controlled psychological terror, perfectly designed to break Phoebe down and neutralize the threat of the incoming police. He forced Phoebe to sit at the kitchen table. Mrs. Albright, summoned from her migraine, stood sentinel at the doorway, her face pale, but her loyalty rigid. "Phoebe," Mr. Blackwood began, pouring a cup of tea with unnerving calm. "You made a regrettable mistake, but we can correct it. I have no wish for unpleasantness. The police will arrive soon. They will conduct their welfare check, and you will tell them the truth, won't you? The truth is you killed Delilah," Phoebe whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The truth," Blackwood corrected, his voice sharp, "is that Miss Vance suffered a crisis of conscience regarding her past debts and fled the country, using the root cellar as a point of access to the old utility tunnels and the far end of the property, where she met a contact. You were overwrought and misheard Mrs. Albright's description of her flight." He then calmly produced the silver locket and the piece of parchment with Silas's handwriting. He held them up as if examining a trivial piece of debris. "The locket. You found it, of course, after she dropped it in her hasty retreat. And this note," he smiled chillingly, "is Silas's paranoid fantasy, an old man's ravings about the house's maintenance shafts." He then presented Phoebe with a terrible ultimatum. Either she corroborates his story, thereby protecting him, or he will use his considerable influence and his detailed knowledge of her own secret, an unsavory and potentially criminal incident from her past, to destroy her life and reputation, ensuring she is blamed as an accomplice. Phoebe's resolve wavered. She was an old woman, exhausted and terrified, and her own hidden past was a weight she could not bear to have exposed. Before she could answer, the silence was broken by the sound of a powerful engine and a siren winding up the long, snowy driveway. The state police had arrived. Blackwood locked the locket and note in his personal waterproof strongbox and disappeared into his study, instructing Mrs. Albright to be the picture of calm and Phoebe to follow his narrative precisely. A young, serious state trooper, Officer Davies, stood at the front door. He was accompanied by his older, more skeptical partner, Sergeant Hayes. "We received a call regarding a missing person and potential illegal activity, specifically concerning the housemaid, Delilah Vance," Davies stated, looking keenly at the estate's intimidating facade. Mrs. Albright was flawless. "Gentlemen, what a terrible inconvenience. The maid, Delilah, was hired under false pretenses. She clearly absconded a week ago due to prior legal troubles, using the remote location to make a clean escape. Mr. Blackwood has been terribly distressed by the breach of trust." Davies, however, was focused on Phoebe, who was standing nervously in the hallway. "Ma'am, you are Phoebe, the cook? You placed the call. You mentioned a root cellar." Phoebe's mouth was dry. She looked from Mrs. Albright's rigid stance to the closed door of the study. Her own fear won. "I was distraught, officer," Phoebe stammered, twisting her apron. Mrs. Albright was explaining that Delilah had used the old utility tunnels accessible through the root cellar to leave the property. "I misunderstood. I thought something terrible had happened. I have been very stressed." Sergeant Hayes exchanged a skeptical look with Davies. "So, you are retracting the report of foul play?" Phoebe nodded miserably. "Yes, it was a false alarm, I apologize." Davies, however, wasn't convinced. "Ma'am, your voice on the phone suggested genuine terror. The note we received indicated a secret shaft and the word study. We take these things seriously." He turned to Mrs. Albright. "We would like to inspect the root cellar and the study area just to satisfy the report." Mrs. Albright's face tightened. "This is an invasion of privacy. You may inspect the cellar. It's a simple storage area, but Mr. Blackwood's study is private. He is a collector of valuable artifacts. We require a warrant for that." The two officers, now more suspicious than before, agreed to inspect the cellar first. Mrs. Albright, with exaggerated reluctance, unlocked the door. The cellar was cold, damp, and perfectly organized. The stone panel that hid the shaft was now completely sealed. The mortar dried and blended seamlessly with the old stone. The dirt floor was flat and undisturbed, exactly as it should be. "Just preserves and wine, gentlemen," Mrs. Albright stated blandly. Davies looked around, his disappointment clear. They had nothing to go on but the word of a clearly stressed old woman who had immediately recanted her statement. However, as Davies turned to leave, his foot snagged on a loose piece of string near the bottom of the wooden steps. He bent down and picked it up. It was a thin nylon thread. "What is this, ma'am?" Mrs. Albright didn't miss a beat. "Just old twine. We use it for the sacks." Davies looked closer. The nylon thread was tied to a small, almost invisible knot, and the end disappeared into a tiny, drilled hole at the base of the staircase frame. He pulled gently on the thread. A faint, soft clicking sound came from the depths of the cellar floor. He pulled harder, and a subtle disturbance of the dry dirt revealed a small square patch of the floor that seemed to move slightly. A cleverly disguised section of wood or stone that served as a small internal hatch. Davies looked from the hidden patch to Mrs. Albright's pale, strained face. He returned to his partner. "Sergeant, I believe we need to secure this property. I'm requesting an immediate search warrant for the entire Blackwood estate. Something is very wrong here. The police are here, but they've only scratched the surface of the terrifying secret. Don't miss the next crucial step in this dark mystery. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel now and make sure notifications are on for the immediate release of Chapter 8. The arrival of the search warrant shattered the carefully constructed shield of the Blackwood estate. Sergeant Hayes and Officer Davies returned within the hour, accompanied by 2 additional state troopers and a plainclothes detective, Detective Miller, who immediately took charge. The first order of business was to secure the hidden patch of floor in the root cellar. Using a set of thin, specialized tools, Detective Miller carefully pried open the small, nearly invisible hatch. Beneath the hatch, concealed by the damp, compact dirt, was a shallow, reinforced wooden box, approximately 2 feet long and 1 foot wide. The box was not filled with documents or money. It was empty, but lined with faded old silk. Miller ran his flashlight over the interior. The silk was stained in places with dark, rusty marks. He also found a single, small silver earring, a cheap, mass-produced piece wedged into a corner. "Mrs. Albright," Miller said, his voice flat and professional. "Whose is this?" Mrs. Albright, her fear now a physical, shaking response, could only stammer. I don't know. Old things. This house is ancient." "The earring is relatively modern," Miller contradicted, "and these stains look recent. The finding in the cellar, though not a body, was enough to justify a complete lockdown and search of the entire estate, including Mr. Blackwood's study." Mr. Blackwood, emerging from the study looking furious but maintaining a pretense of outraged civility, was immediately confined to the parlor under police guard. "This is an unwarranted violation. I will ruin your careers. You have no idea of the power you are challenging." Blackwood raged, his composure finally cracking. "We only care about a missing young woman, Mr. Blackwood," Miller responded calmly, "and the irregularities of your basement." The search team was primarily focused on the study, the room Phoebe and Silas had identified as the destination of the secret shaft. The mahogany door was forced open. The study was exactly as Silas had described, a collector's lair. While the police examined the hidden compartment with the newspaper clippings, Detective Miller focused on the floor, specifically the area near the large desk where Silas had noticed the faint discoloration. The floor was hardwood, but a careful examination revealed a subtle seam running along the grain, cleverly disguised beneath layers of varnish and the heavy desk. The detective called for technical assistance. It took a team almost an hour to carefully dismantle the desk and raise the large section of the hardwood floor. Beneath it, just as the 1853 map had suggested, was the vertical terminus of the old service access shaft. The vertical shaft was narrow and lined with brick, dropping about 5 feet to the horizontal passage that ran back toward the root cellar. The air that rushed up from the shaft was powerful. The same potent metallic smell mixed with the dry, choking dust of long-decayed organic matter. Miller shone a high-powered beam into the shaft. The horizontal tunnel was clearly visible, but it was currently blocked by a makeshift barrier, a heavy wooden pallet reinforced with metal banding. "That's no plumbing issue," Detective Hayes muttered, looking down into the grim opening. They quickly used tools to dismantle the barrier. As the last plank was pulled away, the light beam was free to penetrate the depths of the horizontal passage. The site was not a grave, but a horrifying confirmation of Blackwood's systematic collection. The tunnel was small but perfectly maintained. It was not a burial site. It was a storage facility. Lined along the walls of the passage were several long wooden crates, perfectly sized, wrapped in thick tarpaulin and stenciled with old, faded shipping labels. The total number of crates, carefully stacked, was 5. And in the space immediately at the bottom of the vertical shaft, resting where the supply chain would terminate, was a freshly constructed 6th wooden crate. It was smaller than the others, and the wood was clean, unstained, and still faintly smelling of pine resin. Attached to the lid of the 6th crate, with a small rusted tack, was a simple, handwritten label, D. Vance. The reality of Blackwood's obsession slammed into the investigators. He was not a killer who buried his victims in the garden. He was a meticulous, calculating serial predator who preserved them, viewing them as valuable artifacts to be catalogued and kept. Davies rushed to the parlor where Blackwood was being held. "Mr. Blackwood, we found her, and 5 others. The crates in the tunnel. What have you done to them?" Blackwood, who had been sitting calmly, sipping his tea, stood up slowly. A flicker of triumph crossed his eyes. "Found them?" he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Excellent. I knew you would appreciate the effort. It is an art, officer, not a crime. It is the Raven's End collection." He smiled. The beauty, the preservation, the effort to keep them perfectly whole. But you've disturbed them, haven't you? You've broken the seal on my life's work. You have no idea what that will cost you. The house, the history, the cellar, the study, it all coalesced into a single terrifying truth. Delilah Vance had not been murdered and buried, she had been collected. With the discovery of the 6 crates, including the one labeled D. Vance, the Blackwood estate transformed instantly from a place of mystery to a highly active crime scene. Mr. Alistair Blackwood was placed under immediate arrest. The interrogation of Blackwood revealed a terrifying pathology, confirming Silas's deduction. Blackwood did not see the women as people, but as part of a historical collection, an extreme, meticulous form of objectification rooted in the estate's morbid history. Blackwood spoke with chilling arrogance, treating the bodies as a curator would discuss his prize pieces. He explained that the estate was built by his ancestors, who were involved in unsavory trades centuries ago. The old maintenance shaft, which was forgotten by everyone but him, was originally designed for discreet internal transport, a dark legacy he had resurrected. The root cellar, Blackwood explained calmly to Detective Miller, is ideal. It is perfectly temperate, secluded, and it brings the subject to the lowest, most secure point of the house. The earth is a natural preservative, Detective. It keeps the temperature consistent. I never buried them in the ground. That's so crude. I simply used the earth's natural qualities to aid my art. He confirmed the fate of the women in the newspaper clippings, 5 young women who, like Delilah, were transient, unconnected, and easily disposable by society, were all preserved in the 5 older crates. Miss Vance was a particularly fine specimen, Blackwood mused, almost mournfully. I believe she saw the crates when she went down. She was startled, tried to run, and I had to secure her in the shaft area. It was unfortunate but essential for the integrity of the collection. He described his method with sickening detail. He used a mild, fast-acting paralytic agent obtained under the guise of an obscure chemical research project to ensure the subjects were perfectly still and undamaged before commencing the careful, chemical preservation process. The victims were never truly buried. They were chemically cured and then sealed in custom-made airtight crates. The oil-like residue Silas had seen near the desk was the preservative compound, which Blackwood used in his study, the final staging area, before sealing the crates and moving them back into the deep, temperature-stable tunnel for long-term storage. Phoebe, overcome with guilt and horror, finally broke down and gave a full, truthful statement detailing Mrs. Albright's complicity and the systemic terror of the house. Mrs. Albright, seeing the irrefutable evidence and hearing Blackwood's perverse confession, finally confessed her own role. She revealed that Blackwood had used her own deeply held secret, an incident involving financial fraud from her youth, to blackmail her into silence and compliance for decades. She managed the household and the staff, ensuring Blackwood had the time, isolation, and privacy to continue his terrifying work. He never touched me, Mrs. Albright wept, her voice raw. But the girls. He would bring them up to the study, and I would hear nothing, just the silence. He was a monster, but I was too afraid to expose him and lose everything. Silas was immediately contacted and brought back to the estate, his initial suspicions proven horrifyingly accurate. He provided crucial context on the house's layout, confirming the map's details and the likely location of any other hidden chambers Blackwood might have used. The focus shifted from the collection to Delilah Vance. The crate labeled D. Vance was carefully opened under forensic supervision. The scene inside was exactly what Blackwood had promised, a horror of perfect, meticulous preservation. But as the forensics team documented the chilling contents of the crate, they made a secondary, vital discovery within the lining of the crate, tucked into a small cloth recess designed to hold packing material. It wasn't another earring or a piece of evidence. It was a folded, heavy piece of cotton cloth, a piece of Delilah's uniform. Scrawled across the fabric in a shaky but legible hand was a single cryptic sentence written in what appeared to be her own blood, scraped from a superficial wound. "He has me, not the others. He is waiting." The note changed everything. It implied that Delilah had not been immediately or completely immobilized like the others. She had been conscious long enough to know what was happening, and she had a message. But what did she mean by, "not the others, and he is waiting"? Alistair Blackwood, still sitting in the parlor under guard, was brought the uniform scrap. He read the blood-scrawled note, and his unsettling calm vanished for the first time. "No," he hissed, his face contorted in a terrifying mix of fury and fear. "That's impossible. She was completely inert. She cannot know. I ensured the procedure was flawless." Detective Miller looked at the man, a lifetime of suppressed mania finally erupting. Waiting for what, Blackwood? Waiting for whom? Blackwood refused to answer, his face a mask of silent, terrified obsession, suggesting that Delilah's final desperate message was a crucial piece of the puzzle that even the collector didn't want the police to find. The discovery of Delilah's blood-scrawled note added a fresh layer of psychological terror. "He is waiting" implied a future action, a goal beyond the simple act of collection. Detective Miller knew Blackwood's arrogance would be his undoing, and he pressed the captured man for answers. "Waiting for what, Blackwood? The trial? You've been caught," Miller challenged. Alistair Blackwood, now in a sterile, brightly lit interrogation room, finally broke, not out of remorse but to correct the record of his life's work. "You don't understand the legacy," Blackwood explained, his voice manic but precise. "The collection is the first step, but the ultimate goal is the final artifact." He revealed that for years he had been searching for a way to achieve absolute permanent preservation, not just of the bodies, but of the entire terrifying system. The estate, the isolation, the control, it was all designed to create the perfect environment for his final project. Blackwood confirmed that the 5 earlier victims were, in his view, simply practice runs, preserved artifacts stored in the shaft. Delilah Vance was different, Blackwood confessed, leaning forward, his eyes glittering. The girl she replaced, the one 5 years ago, she was the last practice. Delilah was the key. He explained his final, terrifying plan. He had become obsessed with the idea of securing a permanent, unchallenged caretaker for his collection and his property. He wanted a human presence, a sentinel who would remain with the house and its secrets forever, unmoving and silent, a living, breathing part of his legacy. "I didn't kill Delilah to add her to the shaft," Blackwood admitted, his voice dropping to a horrifying whisper. "I used the preservation agents to induce a state of long-term, non-fatal paralysis. She was to be the ultimate artifact, a subject who was preserved, contained, but not dead." The note, "He is waiting," referred to Blackwood's final grand act. He was waiting for the perfect moment, a weather-induced isolation, the perfect political distraction, to seal Delilah, while still alive and paralyzed, into a permanent, hidden recess within the foundation of the house itself. "I was going to seal the study floor forever," Blackwood stated, a twisted pride in his voice, "and she would be there. A sentinel. Conscious, silent, entombed, watching over my collection and my home for centuries. The ultimate preservation." Delilah's crate, the one marked D. Vance, was not meant for the shaft. It was a temporary container. He was moving her during the storm to the foundation. She was meant to be sealed beneath the original cornerstone, a silent guardian. Blackwood sighed. But she must have woken up during the transfer. She must have known. The police had one final desperate task: to find Delilah before Blackwood's paralysis wore off or before the location of the cornerstone was lost forever. Silas, utilizing his knowledge of the estate's original 1700s construction, led the police to the main parlor. He pointed to a section of stone wall behind the grand fireplace, a section known only to the oldest groundskeepers, where a false hearth concealed the home's true foundation. Working quickly, the police used specialized cutting tools to break through the thick stone. Behind it, not a storage space, but a claustrophobic, pitch-black cavity was revealed, a space just large enough to contain a single prone body. And there she was, Delilah Vance. She was lying on a bed of heavy, coarse linen, partially covered by a thick, clear plastic sheeting. She was deathly pale, her eyes open, staring blankly at the rough stone ceiling inches above her. She was breathing shallowly, but she was alive. The paralytic agent had begun to wear off, leaving her in a state of terror and agonizing limited awareness. She could move nothing but her eyes, which were darting wildly, confirming her worst fear, that Blackwood was moments away from sealing her in forever. With agonizing care, the police pulled Delilah from the foundation. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, her body severely weakened, but her mind permanently scarred by the experience of her conscious, silent imprisonment. The house was secured. Alistair Blackwood and Mrs. Albright were both charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy and murder in the first degree. The ultimate preservation failed. Delilah's survival was the final, devastating blow to Blackwood's twisted legacy. She became the living, breathing proof that the darkness of Raven's End could not consume everything. Her terrifying experience became a symbol of resilience, confirming that sometimes the simple human will to communicate a truth, even with a blood-scrawled note, is the most powerful weapon against the most systematic, clinical evil. The collection was gone, but the Sentinel lived, ready to tell her story.